Hi, Seahawk fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad. Keith Myers is on vacation. We've got a great special guest into this show this evening, Bryce Coutts from the Hawks Zone Rundown podcast. Welcome in, Bryce. How you doing?
Good, Bill. How are you?
I'm very good. It's great to have you. Thank you for accommodating and filling that seat for Keith while he's, I think he's in Hawaii still. But
lucky guy.
coming back shortly after the 4th. So he'll be back to regular schedule stuff next week. But it's really nice to have you. You offer a really nice, fresh perspective. And we're going to get to some of the things you kind of key in on as your specialty when we talk later in the show about Jalen Milroe and the quarterback position group. We are also going to feature the series that Keith and I have been doing, looking at all the different position groups on the team. And today we're looking at the linebacker group. And then we're going to talk about what you think, what I think about where our weaknesses still are in position groups. What is the weakest position group on this team? And could it ultimately cost us? If it's not addressed, or do we think it'll self-resolve after training camp? Maybe somebody steps up. We'll talk about all that too. So what are you doing these days on your show? How's it going? And where do you see it going for the remainder of the season?
Yeah, no, it's kind of that fun period, and obviously you and Keith know that as well, where it's kind of this dead slow period, and it's trying to create content and keep it going because there's no real news happening. So it's been kind of interesting. We've had a couple different guests on. We've had Hawk blogger Brian Nimhauser on. We've had Greg Bell on. I just did a really cool episode actually yesterday with Cody Alexander of Match Quarters. So he's very defensive driven, analytic guy that kind of has really taken a liking to what Mike Macdonald's defense is built on and what it's been built off of. So we were able to kind of do a deep dive into Mike Macdonald's defense, what it was last year and how it can evolve this year, and what should Seattle fans' expectations be of this defense now that they're coming back together and in year 2 of this system. So that was a really cool one. We're going to be having Bobby Peters on, who's done extensive work into the West Coast offense, especially the Gary Kubiak and Mike Shanahan style of it with Kyle and Sean McVay. So we're going to have him on to kind of do a deep dive on the offensive side. And some other guests here and there. We're getting closer to training camp, so we'll start doing positional breakdowns and divisional breakdowns with some guests coming on from the Cardinals, Rams, and 49ers over the next couple of weeks here. So trying to fill the void, but
You're
it's been fun.
Doing it well. You're doing it well. Yeah, that's fantastic. You know, I've kind of come to a liking of Mike Macdonald's defense myself. And the way that it projects into the season. You know, you leave that group last, 1st of January, and they were definitely on the rise. And now you're anticipating with all but one starter coming back, and those shoes have been adequately filled, that this defense can just keep going right where it left off. And we'll get into a little bit of that today as we talk about the linebacker group. I wanted to ask you, as we kind of start the conversation about linebackers, what your overall feeling is about the group, and maybe at the end of this conversation we can kind of dovetail back into that and see how you're feeling heading into training camp and the 2025 season.
So the linebacker group for me is definitely kind of my area of concern, and it's not because of Ernest Jones and Tyrese Knight. It's more to do with what's behind them. I really like Drake Thomas. I think he's a very intelligent and instinctual linebacker. His size is kind of a worrisome thing. And the depth behind it, we're talking about Josh Ross. We're talking about Tyreek Jackson, who they brought in as an undrafted free agent. So, they've moved Jamie Sheriff there, I believe, to play kind of that off-ball linebacker spot. I know it's Mike Macdonald's wheelhouse, and that's kind of his, area. Like Pete had defensive backs were his wheelhouse and stuff, but I get concerned that if we lose Jones or Knight for any period of time this year, as we saw last year with Dotson and Baker in there, when you don't have the right linebackers in this defensive scheme, it really struggles to be effective. And so that's where, for me, I'm just a little bit worried about this group. So that's why I'm kind of excited to dive into it tonight and talk about it.
Well, you mentioned Dodson and Baker. We thought we were pretty decent heading into last season. We were kind of excited what Mike Macdonald could do. Dodson in particular came over, played kind of a half a season with Buffalo there, and seemingly was definitely had some upside to him, and got in here, and it just really disappointed overall. Baker was unhealthy, didn't make it through much of training camp. So kind of started late, gelling with all the other guys, and that defense kind of fell flat until Ernest Jones arrived at the trade deadline. What did you think of that acquisition at the time? Obviously, it worked. How did it work, though? What was the key difference makers?
So I think, the key difference maker with Ernest Jones coming in over Baker and Dotson is, one, I think you got an alpha, a guy that really could command that group, where I don't know if you got that out of Baker and Dotson in that regard. And you also got a guy that, if we think about it, you go back, he was on the defense for the LA Rams that won the Super Bowl. That was such a great defense that year for them. And you're talking about a guy that Bobby Wagner had kind of gone, and Aaron Donald had kind of gone to him and like, hey, this is now your defense. And for Bobby Wagner to turn over and look at a young linebacker and go, this is your defense now, like, you're going to be running this. That's pretty high praise coming from, arguably a first ballot Hall of Fame linebacker in Bobby Wagner. I think the thing that Jones really helped Seattle with was he doesn't miss a lot of tackles. He's a sure tackler, but he's very good in understanding where offenses want to attack in the passing game. And we saw that especially in the Arizona game, where he settled into a zone and picked off Kyler Murray. He does a really good job in his coverage. And I think that's something that they were lacking, especially with Jerome Baker, as we saw in that San Francisco home game. Could not cover George Kittle to save his life, and they exploited that. And that's something that, with this division that we know McVay and Kyle Shanahan like to do. They like to run those crossers, and they like to run those tight ends and get them involved in their offensive passing game. So to have a linebacker that could honestly give you the ability to cover some of that, I think was a big help for Mike Macdonald.
Talk to me about the prototypical linebacker that Mike Macdonald likes to have in his defense. These guys seem to be a little bit more athletic, not necessarily with straight line speed, but the agility is definitely there, and the instincts and the leadership qualities, I think, are really high on the list of what are important qualities to have in his defense. What do you think?
Yeah, no, and that's something I would definitely agree with. Mike Macdonald has a certain linebacker. You look at Roquan Smith in the acquisition in Baltimore when he was there as the defensive coordinator. That defense was struggling a little bit until they got that acquisition of his type of linebacker. And his linebacker, like you said, tends to be more athletic. They're not a big thumper, but they're a guy that can really be rangy and go sideline to sideline due to the fact they play a hybrid version of a 3-4 scheme. Those two inside guys have to be able to travel sideline to sideline and create, plays outside of the hashes. And that's something that I noticed with Ernest Jones and Tyrese Knight were able to do last year. So when you look at the two guys that obviously came in after that midseason switch in Knight and Jones, that was one thing I think that jumped off the page initially, was the athletic ability of both of those guys was far superior to what you got out of Tyrell Dotson and Jerome Baker.
Let's talk about the instincts, because I think that's just really understated with these two guys. They just really understand how to play the position, the reaction time, the diagnosing of the play, and getting to the spot quickly. Again, it's not about the straight line speed. It's about that anticipation. And these guys seem to do it as good as anybody. In fact, I would argue that the tandem here has a chance to be top 5 in the NFL, considering where the overall defense is expected to land as well. What are your thoughts around that?
I think that's a very fair assessment of where this group could land as being a top 5 unit. I think this duo, especially with Jones and Knight, can be one of the top linebacking duos in the NFL just because of their pure athleticism. Knight, I think still, the one thing, he was super productive in college. Like, that was the one thing you heard about him coming to that draft, was he was a tackling machine. Like, once he hit you, you were going down. Now, the question was, based on where he was playing, what was the level of competition he was playing at? Was it going to translate? I think what you may see this year that may put this group over, into that upper echelon, these linebackers, is their ability to blitz. I think you're going to see more, simulated pressures that Mike Macdonald likes to do, and different things. And, he started to do a little bit more of it towards the end of that year. Tyrese Knight came on a few more blitzes than he was earlier in the year. I think that's one thing you may see from this group, is you may see these linebackers blitz a little bit more than last year to help create some of that pressure for that defense as a whole.
So the Seahawks drafted an interesting guy in the second round. In fact, moved up to get him, Nick Emenwari. Now, he doesn't play linebacker, but he can give you some snaps from at least the weak side spot, the strong side, depending on how you want to look at it, how the defense shifts, and will contribute to that as well. So when you're talking about disguising that second level of the defense, he's going to be in that mix as well. How do these three players work together, and how do you see them fitting on the field? You would think Emenwari's coming on the field, you're probably taking Knight off, but is that necessarily true?
So it's really interesting you said. I really think they're going to go more to a dime type of defense, where I think what you're going to see is I think Knight may come off the field in certain sub packages, and you'll see Emenwari play that weak side linebacker or rover linebacker role, where he's kind of like almost a cross between a safety and a linebacker. He's got some gap responsibilities as that linebacker in those certain packages, but he also is kind of more of that down in the box safety. And I think what you'll see is you'll see like a Shaquille Griffin and Reek Woolen outside. You'll see Witherspoon come in as the nickel. You'll see both Love and Bryant as your safeties, and you'll see Nick Emenwari walk down. And the thing they can do with that is, because Emenwari is such a freak athlete, like we're talking about a guy that people are saying is like Cam Chancellor, but he's more athletic, which is a very scary thing because Cam was no slouch as an athlete. But you're talking about a guy that you could all of a sudden basically be in a 3 safety package, but still be able to stop the run enough to create problems for an offense where they go, okay, do we go into a 5 receiver look or, an empty situation to try and pull Emenwari out of the box, but then you still have Ernest Jones sitting in there. That's where I see how they're going to use Nick Emenwari. Is it won't affect Jones as much as it'll affect Tyrese Knight and what sub packages he's not a part of that maybe he was last year, because they didn't have that versatile chess piece that they do now have with Nick Emenwari.
It's interesting that you put that all together, because that's kind of the way I see it as well. And it's probably the reason why I don't feel so bad about this position group, even though you look at it on paper, it's kind of sketch after the top 2 starters. But if you kind of add Nick Emenwari into that mix in certain snaps and certain defensive calls, you begin to feel a little bit better of how it's all going to kind of come together. There's still a lot there that I'm somewhat unsure about as to how it all kind of works, and who gets the snaps and who doesn't, and who drops back into coverage. Is Tyrese Knight going to be that much better at the beginning of the year, and then it's going to kind of get swapped out as time goes on? It'll be fascinating to me. So as far as the depth is concerned, you mentioned those guys right off the top, the Drake Thomas, the Josh Ross, the Patrick O'Connell. Some of those guys, a couple of those guys have been hanging around the team for a couple of years now, practice squad mostly. Sometimes they'll get called up. They did take some snaps. Drake Thomas has been kind of a special teams guy, at least he was last year. But nobody's really like stepped up and challenged for like, okay, you are the third guy. Do you see that happening this year? Or do you think we're going to have to go outside of the current roster to kind of solve this position longer term? Or does it need to be solved?
What I'll say is this. I think they have their third linebacker, which I think is Drake Thomas. I think they really do like him in that building. He's great on specials, but he's also, when he has had to play, he's not out of place. He's just physically not as imposing as what they've had or what they're losing. If you lose a Jones or Knight, I think what they're banking on is Tyreek Jackson maybe shows something and can become that fourth linebacker. Now, like you said, Nick Emenwari is going to be phased into this conversation of, does Seattle really keep 4 true inside linebackers on this roster, or do they go with 3 and say it's Jones, Knight, and Thomas, and then Nick Emenwari factors into that, and you get a Tyreek Jackson onto your practice squad where you have game day elevation capability with him, or, a Patrick O'Connell. That's where it's going to be really interesting for me. I really like Tyreek Jackson. I think he's going to be someone that pushes, a guy like Josh Ross and Patrick O'Connell in training camp. If they struggle, and this is where I'll say this is the if you do see struggles when that second team unit starts coming into the preseason and there's a real drop off, and outside of Drake Thomas, I think you could see them try and add somebody. Maybe John Schneider pulls one of his late preseason deals that he's so infamous for doing, and you see them move a late round pick to go pick up a veteran linebacker that can play more meaningful snaps in the case of an injury. Because the one thing we've got here is Ernest Jones is coming off a knee procedure that was done. It wasn't like he had an injury. It was a cleanup procedure, but that's still going to take some time. And that's still something where you go in your head and go, okay, like, how healthy is he going to be hopefully by the start of training camp? And you can kind of figure out your depth from there.
Yeah. Do you know anything more than what you've said about Tyreek Jackson? I'm not familiar with him too much. I know he's on the roster. Haven't had a chance to do a deep dive on him at all. Are they expecting him to come in and make this roster?
So what I've heard is, yes, they do expect him to push to make this roster. And that was part of the reason you saw the switch between him and Jackson Woodard, who they originally signed, that everyone was super high on.
Right.
And they cut him right after rookie minicamp, and then they went out and got Tyreek Jackson. He has very good tape from his days at Kentucky in college. He kind of fits the mold, actually, to what Mike Macdonald. He's 6'1", he's 237. He's got good range as a player. He's a good tackler. The thing for me that really impresses me with him coming out of Kentucky is his coverage ability. He is very good at dropping and carrying routes down the seam. And like we talked about a little bit earlier with, what this offensive kind of gauntlet is now in the NFC West with the play callers you have that are all a derivative off of the Mike Shanahan and Gary Kubiak's coaching tree. They like to use that. They like to use their tight ends to attack the middle of the field. And so when you've got linebackers that can drop and cover and run with tight ends down the middle, it makes your defense that much more, confusing in some respects for an offense, because now you're not just seeing safeties pick those guys up, or there isn't a certain substitution where you see a certain amount of DBs come on the field to handle it. They can leave linebackers out there. And that's where I think there is a lot of hope that a Tyreek Jackson really can come in and potentially steal one of those later linebacker spots, or even push, say, a guy like Drake Thomas for that third spot.
I had one more question before we kind of move on to the next subject. The alignments that fans are used to, that our listeners are used to seeing on the field. You're either in a 4-3 front or a 3-4. Sometimes those linebackers don't present. We've got edge rushers that factor into that, and you've got a guy kind of manning that middle. That's be Ernest Jones. Where does Tyrese Knight align? How is Nick Emenwari going to fit into that? How often will they be on the field? Like, how many snaps can we expect percentage-wise to them being just in a base defense versus the nickel and the dime that you mentioned earlier?
It's really interesting with Mike Macdonald's defense, because one of the things with them is it's all about, multiplicity with it. They want to be as multiple as possible and ask guys to do it. They don't want to necessarily have a bunch of substitutions constantly with their scheme. And a lot of what he likes to do, it seems like, is play matchups throughout the week. So if he knows you're a team that loves to be in 11 personnel and run a lot of 4 receiver sets, or even, 12 personnel, and you want to do something, you'll see him change the defense accordingly. So like, when you look at the way they align, they have one thing that they do like to do, and it's called like a boss front, which is big over strong side. And so that's where you saw Leonard Williams a lot of the time almost play like he was a D end and outside. And that's where what you'll see with it too is you'll see that they'll bring a lot of guys down, and it'll look like it's man coverage across the board, and they'll all kind of be in a line, and you drop, a Leonard Williams into coverage, which is the actual defensive front they were in when he got his interception against the Jets. And that's how they simulate pressure. They'll drop him, and they'll bring a Tyrese Knight on a blitz in the A gap, and they'll drop Leonard Williams out. And so when you talk about where these guys will align, Knight and Jones you'll probably see them between the tackles, I would say, and moving around that way. But with Mike Macdonald, you see a lot of underfronts, you'll see a lot of overfronts depending on it. They are more of a 3-4. So for what normal fans would assume, they are a 3-4. You'll see 2 edge rushers on the field, you'll see 2 true linebackers in some sense. But then you'll see things where like they'll go to that front and they'll drop, they'll take a Chenna Nwosu off the field and they'll put a DeMarcus Lawrence out there. And that's part of the reason they went and got DeMarcus Lawrence. I don't think it's for him to be an edge. It's for him to be a D-end with his hand in the ground and help allow Leonard Williams not to have to play certain snaps in the run game as much as he did last year. That was really the big acquisition for DeMarcus Lawrence this year.
Interesting. Yeah, no, he's terrific defending the run. I mean, if he can stay healthy, I think that's a great contribution factor for this defense. Okay, let's switch gears. Now, I came into this conversation thinking, well, maybe the linebacker group could be thought of as one of the weaker position groups, at least on the defense. But most of the weaknesses that come to mind seemingly are on the offense. As you look at this team and this roster, can you identify the weakest position group and why is that? And what do we have as far as the starters? Is the weakness attributed to more of the depth, or is it truly just a weakness from top to bottom?
So I know everyone is going to say that it should be the offensive line is the weakness. And especially on the offensive side, they're going to go, it's the offensive line. On the offense, I actually think it's the receiving core as a whole. And I don't think it's necessarily because
I agree.
DK Metcalf is gone. The reason why I think it's this receiving core is you've got JSN, who is now the guy. There's no Tyler, there's no DK. He is the guy now. You're also switching to a very different offensive scheme. And that's why I think and I don't think it's because there's a lack of talent there that makes it the weakest group. It's a change for a few of these guys on how to run their routes, how to do certain things schematically that's going to make it a challenge, I think, for the first bit. This offense is very much more based off of timing. It's very much more based on understanding zones, understanding how to get through zones. And that's where I think Cooper Kupp's addition helps this group be a stronger group than initially I would have, when they first got rid of DK and everything. And I went, oh gosh, like this is going to be a lot of change. Cooper Kupp's going to be like an extra coach on the field. Like he understands this offense and this scheme probably as well as Clint Kubiak does. And that's going to help. But when you look at the depth of this group and you go, okay, we've got JSN, we've got Cooper Kupp, and then MVS, we all know what he really is. He's very much a deep threat kind of gadget receiver. You're not asking MVS to run a lot of option routes and, understand where to sit in the zone. You're asking MVS to take the top off of defense. Now, Torrey Horton, for me, is the deciding factor in this receiving core. And I know that's a lot to say for a rookie. If he is healthy and can contribute, he will be receiver 3 in this offense. And I think if he can do it throughout training camp, it will make MVS potentially a camp casualty and get cut because he does the blow the top off of defense. He did that at Colorado State. He has 4.3 speed when he's healthy. But he understands option routes. He understands how to sit in zones and do those things. Now, I also think Jake Bobo is going to be better suited for this offense than he was for the Ryan Grubb offense. Ryan Grubb's offense was very much vertical concepts. It was, we're going to stretch you vertically. We're not going to do a lot of stretching horizontally. Jake Bobo, as we know, isn't exactly a vertical burner. He's not going to take a top off of defense, but he can be that check down guy. And so when you look at the history of this offense, the receivers generally all kind of have a similar skill set. Some excel athletically in other places. But if you go as far back to look at, the 1994 San Francisco 49ers, which is where Mike Shanahan was the OC with Gary Kubiak as the quarterback coach. Yes, they had Jerry Rice. They also had John Taylor still on that team at the time. And though they had comparable skill sets, you look at Denver in the 90s, you had Ed McCaffrey and Rod Smith, comparable skill sets. Now you're starting to see this with this offense is you have comparable skill sets with your receivers. You don't have a DK and then a JSN and a Tyler that all three of them have completely different skill sets. You see now JSN, Cooper Kupp, Torrey Horton, Jake Bobo, Ricky White's a guy I think that's going to make this roster because I think his special teams capability will make it hard for him to come off. But I also think you're only going to take 5 receivers this year out of camp. So for me on offense, that is where I look at this group and go, this is probably your weakest group. But when you say weakest group, it's not massive. I don't look at this as like a detriment to the team. I just look at it across the board and go, yeah, that's probably where you have the least amount of consistent talent there in that room right now.
I agree with everything you said, and you put it. You brought in some factors that I think are really important, like how many wide receivers are we going to carry? Who's going to make this roster on the back end? You mentioned MVS. I don't know that I agree with you initially that he's a camp cut guy, only because he's fairly inexpensive, and with the injury history to Cooper Kupp, I think they do want to keep a veteran on the roster until they can kind of figure that out. Now, I would take it even a step further than I think you even did in mentioning the injury type stuff. Cooper Kupp. I mean, Cooper Kupp is injured on day one. Let's just say he misses the first 4 games instead of a middle 4 games somewhere in the season. That's going to be really hard. If you take a look at this roster, you've got JSN, and then you've just got a bunch of guys. We drafted Torrey Horton, but he hasn't proven anything yet. Cooper Kupp is excellent, but we've seen the last 3 years he's good for about 12 games. And there's no reason to think that would improve. I mean, it could, and we hope it does, but I'm not counting on it completely. So I agree with you that this is the weakest group overall, but it doesn't necessarily mean, like you said, the talent is poor. It's not a talent poor group. It's just a unproven group together in a new scheme, as you mentioned, with a new quarterback, and nobody really knows exactly how it's going to work and look. And you've got Kubiak, who's a smart guy, who's got a set kind of way that he likes to do things, but he's also cognizant of, I've got to work with the talent I've got too, and I've got to make that work and incorporate all of that. Running backs out of the backfield, our tight end room, that'll all kind of factor into that as well. The last thing you mentioned was, how many wide receivers are we going to carry? In the past, we've carried 6. Sometimes we've carried 7. And now we're going to have an extra quarterback to worry about. We're going to talk about Jalen Milroe in just a minute. We've got a fullback. You've got some offensive line questions that you're going to have to answer. You may carry 1 less of those so that you can carry a fullback, and then a wide receiver might have to go through to the practice squad so we can keep that extra quarterback on the roster. So it'll be very interesting to see how they put that puzzle together this year. What are your thoughts overall on roster construction, just overall on the offensive side of the ball? I mean, the defense seems pretty straightforward, but they could go steal a spot from there as well to make sure that the offense has enough to operate.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. For me with this team, I look at it this way. I think they're going to keep 5 backs. So when I say backs, I mean that's including a fullback with that group. I think they're going to keep Ken Walker, Charbonnet, Kenny McIntosh, and Damian Martinez, and they're going to keep, in my opinion, I think it's going to be Robbie Oots. I think he's going to end up being your fullback. The reason for that is you are taking a guy that has had better production at tight end than a Brady Russell in the college game. And don't get me wrong, I love Brady Russell, but Brady Russell's more of a special teams guy, and I think they're going to find other guys that can contribute a similar way in special teams through defense. And even a Robbie Oots, I think you'll see as a special teams contributor as well. So there's 5 spots right there. And like you said, there's 3 quarterbacks they're going to keep. None of these quarterbacks are getting cut. They're keeping all 3 of these guys, in my opinion, unless something drastic happens, which I don't foresee. So there's 8 spots on that roster. And usually you try and keep it like 24 on offense or 25-ish on offense and 25 on defense. Then you have your 3 special teams. So if we already got 8 positions taken up in the backfield, I suspect they will keep 5 receivers. And like I said, I think it's going to be Kupp, JSN. I think it'll be a battle between Horton and MVS. Jake Bobo and Ricky White are all going to factor in. I think Cody White will factor in, but I think it'll take a lot for him to jump one of those 2, just because you look at Ricky White's production at a very underperforming program in UNLV, and he was a very productive receiver. And he gives you special teams returner capability, which I think is something that they're going to be drastically in the market for after the failed experiments last year in the return game, as we all saw. So if you add those 5, now we're looking at, that's 13 spots. I think you're going to see probably 8 or 9 offensive linemen. I don't think they'll carry 10 because I think there'll be some change to this group just because of the Rick Dennison, John Benton factor. And I think they're going to keep the 3 guys they drafted this year over. And I think there's 2 guys that Seattle may try to sneak through to practice squad, one being Lamea and the other being Mike Jarrell. So I think tight end's the interesting factor because Elijah Arroyo, to me, and I can't remember which article I read it in. They did an interview with Kubiak and Mike McDonald, and they kind of dropped that, hey, we might try and use him as an X too in some of our formations. And Arroyo's quite the athlete. He gives you definitely Jimmy Graham vibes. I could see a situation where they look at Arroyo and go, yeah, you're our tight end 3 behind maybe, AJ Barner and Noah Fant. You're tight end 3, but you're also receiver 6, and we can split you out and use you in certain sets as a receiver to get you on the field. And that gives us our 6th receiver in a way without us having to actually keep one. That's how I can see that balancing act go, because I don't think Seattle trusts Ken Walker's health enough to jettison a McIntosh or a Damian Martinez and try and sneak them through to the practice squad, because McIntosh showed us at the end of last year he's a very capable running back when given the ball to an extent, and I really like Damian Martinez. I had a 4th, 5th round grade on him. So when he was still sitting there in the 7th round, I think a lot of it had to do with how deep. Yeah, a lot of it had to do with how deep this draft class was. He brings something that none of the other backs, in my opinion, bring, which is he brings a level of nasty to when he runs the football that we haven't seen since Chris Carson, since Beast Mode, since Thomas Rawls, where when he finishes a run or someone is in his way, he is going to run through you and let you know he is run through you. And that's something that sometimes, when you're going to be a team that wants to run the ball as much as Seattle has told everybody with every move they've made, they want to run the ball. You need tone setters in that backfield to do it. And I think K9 gives you the flash. Charbonnet is a good back. I think Damian Martinez is your thumper. That's your attitude setter. And one of the first things he said was, here comes Beast Mode 2.0. And that's a pretty bold statement to make as a rookie. I think he's one of the few guys potentially with his way of his running. I don't think he'll be as good as Marshawn, but I think there's a style to his run that'll be very similar to Marshawn.
I think that he's even potentially better than everything you just said, in that if you go back to the Oregon State film, he ran the wide zone as his primary primary snap count when he got a chance to carry the ball. And he was excellent at it. And he's very patient, but very decisive. And when he hits that hole, man, he can go and knock you over at the same time. So for me, he absolutely makes this roster, and also probably surplants Kenny McIntosh as the number 3 back heading into the season. We'll see what happens with Ken Walker at the top and Charbonnet. I think eventually it's going to be hard to keep Damian Martinez off the field as the season goes on. He's going to get his opportunities. He's going to take advantage. And pretty soon that guy's going to get, 7, 8 snap carries a game potentially. And by the time the playoffs roll around, he could be a key cog in that offense for sure. Now, getting back to the wide receivers, I agree with kind of your breakdown, your idea of how it's all going to kind of fall out as far as the construction is concerned. I understand too, I'll add a name on the wide receiver list. The team seems to really like Steven Sims. And they brought him in. He's got a little bit of experience, but kind of a special teams guy, kind of a do-it-all guy for them back there. So we'll see. And Derek Young seems out of the equation at this point, but the kid's got a special quality about him that if he ever puts it together and stays healthy, this coaching staff could really like the skill sets that he brings in. So we'll see what happens there. It's similar to kind of Jake Bobo with a little bit more athleticism, a little bit more speed, especially, kind of coming out of the backfield, those jet sweep kind of things. And when you take a look at Clint Kubiak's offense, that's a real big factor in misdirection is the jet sweep stuff, especially if you add Jalen Milroe into that equation. And we're going to talk about that because I can hardly wait to talk to you about this prospect, because you did a lot of work on him pre-draft, during the draft, post-draft. You've talked a lot about him. You've watched some film. I've done a little bit of that myself, and I'm telling you, it's hard to project a prospect like Jalen Milroe into the NFL, especially early on. But when I watched a lot of the Clint Kubiak stuff and film from Minnesota in 2021 and then New Orleans in 2024, and you watched how the offense was set up, they were missing a couple of key components. A really dynamic speedster on the edge, and they did have, what was his name? I lost it. The guy from New Orleans that kind of comes in and plays tight end, quarterback /
Taysom Hill.
Taysom Hill. They did have Taysom Hill, but he's not Jalen Milroe in any way, shape, or form athletically, and the threat of the outside speed. And you add a Jalen Milroe factor into the way Clint Kubiak runs that offense and what he wants to do and how he wants to set up defenses. Holy cow, there could be some serious opportunities for Jalen Milroe to cut back against the grain, against the movement of, the direction of where the offensive line wants to take the defense. And if you don't account for Jalen Milroe on the backside on every play, he's going to kill you on the edge and pick up a guaranteed 10 yards. I mean, it's a gift out there. So they're going to have a spy on Jalen Milroe, which means you're going to have to completely account for him on every play that he's on offense. And that's why I do believe that they are going to run at least, I'm going to say 10 design plays for Jalen Milroe out of the box, and primarily, red zone stuff. They might give him a series depending on how the game goes or whatever, but a lot of red zone stuff initially, get his feet wet. I'm really curious though to see why you think Seattle was attracted to this prospect to begin with, why they drafted him, and what they thought, how they thought that he would fit into this team, this roster in year one.
So, like you said, I did a lot of deep dives on all these quarterbacks this year, and Jalen Milroe was a very interesting prospect. I was one of the very first thoughts for me was he needed another year of school. I thought he needed to go back another year. I didn't know if that meant going back to Alabama, though. I didn't think Kalen DeBoer's offense fit his skill set. And part of that is within the stats. When you look at what he did with Nick Saban, we were talking about in 2023, a Heisman candidate. Like, this guy was one of the best players in college football. You look at that Alabama-Michigan game, he was unbelievable in that game. And we're talking about a guy that, threw it under 300 times, in that season, but he completed 65% of those at college for almost 3,000 yards, 23 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. But he also added 161 carries for 531 yards and 12 touchdowns on the ground.
Wow.
So
right?
You showcase he had a better passer efficiency with Nick Saban. You then flip it to the last year in 2024, where Kalen DeBoer comes in, and Kalen DeBoer loves to throw the football. Everything through Kalen DeBoer's offense is we're going to pass, and then run a little bit. So his total went up. He threw 319 times. So you added another, almost 40 throws onto this kid. He still completed 64.3% of his passes. So a small dip in his completion, but he's still up above 60%. But you saw the interceptions creep up. You saw the touchdowns drop. But you saw the rushing numbers increase. Because they were in such a drop-back scheme, he made up for more of the running game. So he had less carries, but he had 726 yards on the ground and 20 touchdowns. So like you said, there's that weapon factor with him. And so the more I dug into him, and if you do like the adjusted completion percentage for him, in 2024, accounting for the drops and the throwaways, I had him at a 71% completion percentage, which wasn't really talked about in the draft process. Everyone was just, he can't hit the intermediate throws. He's inconsistent. He's this, he's that. Okay, that's fine. But the thing for me with Jalen Milroe, the more I watched him, the one player that came to mind for me, and everyone wanted to say Jalen Hurts, and I understand the comparison. Alabama quarterback, he can run, he can do things. He, to me, and this is where it might kind of surprise you, he is a more athletic Brett Favre to me. He's got the cannon arm, and he does some unbelievable things. He's got the work ethic, and he's just kind of got this spontaneous spot to him at points in games. You watch him and you're like, how did he do that? How did he make that throw deep down the field? And when Favre came out of, Southern Miss at the time, it was, hey, guy's got a rocket arm, bit of a wild stallion. You got to kind of tame him, which Mike Holmgren was able to do in Green Bay, and you kind of reap the benefits of it. Now we're talking about a player now that has more athletic capabilities than Brett Favre even did. And I'm not saying Jalen Milroe was going to be Brett Favre, but some of his qualities really spoke to me that way. And you think about John Schneider, who was around that in Green Bay. John Schneider has kind of said a couple of things about quarterbacks over the years, and you can kind of piece them together. He was really interested in Josh Allen. Josh Allen coming out had a lot of the same issues Jalen Milroe did. He wasn't a great percentage completion guy in college. He had a big arm. He was athletic, but he was raw. And you saw the rawness in his first couple of years in Buffalo. He refined his footwork and everything, and now you see what player we're talking about. We're talking about an MVP of the league. You then also at the same time look at Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson, big arm, not as raw, but the athletic ability. So you're starting to see these traits. Now you get a guy like Jalen Milroe where John kind of got the best of both worlds. He got Sam Darnold and Drew Lock to be those guys that are going to start. And now I can go get this raw player that I don't have to play and I can groom like I did, with Ron Wolf and all these guys in Green Bay and follow the Green Bay mantra to an extent, but with the guy that we can put in special little things for here and there and use his athletic ability, like you spoke of, run situations in the red zone. Like he immediately, in my opinion, makes our red zone offense one of the hardest to defend in the NFL because you put him in there and say you line up in shotgun for say, and we're on the 7-yard line. And I remember back when Carolina used to do this with Cam Newton, you'd have D'Angelo Williams and Jonathan Stewart flanking him on either side. And it was QB power into the area. And it was a hard play to stop for most teams. They couldn't stop the athleticism of Cam Newton. Now you say you put Damian Martinez and Robbie Oots beside him, or even a Ken Walker, you've created a 3-headed monster in your backfield in a sub package. But the one thing about Milroe that he can do better than some guys that have done this in the past, like a Terrell Pryor, is he can step back and still throw the ball rather efficiently. And so for me, when I look, at some of the other stuffs with him, like big time throws in 2024, he had 22 of them with excellent. I'm talking about for me, excellent timing, ball placement. His pressure to sack rate was 12.5%. So that's better than average, showing he can get out of situations. And so the other thing about this kid and why, as the draft got closer, I kept hearing rumblings from sources I talked to that after the 30 visit, Seattle loved him. Like John Schneider fell in love with him. He is such a hard worker. He's not the type of guy that, oh yeah, I've made it to the NFL. I went to Alabama. I was this kid grew up in a military family. He knows his weaknesses. He was telling people at the combine, hey, these are the areas I know I have to improve in to be a starter at the NFL and an elite starter, not just someone you kind of hand the keys over to and then are still looking to be the guy. I need to work on this. I need to work on this. And teams were shocked that he was very self-aware of the same issues they had noted. So when that stuff started to come in the night of the, couple days before the draft on our show, I had even said, I think they're going to take Jalen Milroe if he's sitting there in the 3rd round. And we had our draft show that we were doing. And when that pick at, 92 was there, I said to Ryan and Michael Thompson, who was on the show, I said, I think they're going to take Jalen Milroe. I think the pick, and sure enough, it ended up being Jalen Milroe. I am very optimistic about what Jalen Milroe can be if he's brought along the right way. And that's going to be the key thing is don't press this guy to play and be your full-time starter probably for 2 years.
Okay. So awesome. Awesome recap of that whole process and agree with all of that. Now let's talk about the what ifs. Okay. First off, what if it doesn't work? We spent a 3rd round pick on him. We tried to develop him. It's probably going to be at least a couple years on the roster to do everything we can to get this guy ready to play football, and it just doesn't work. And he ends up being just kind of a gadgety, special weapon, kind of a Taysom Hill thing, which is the floor to me. Where's the floor for you? And describe what the floor looks like for people, just to lay out a scenario where this could happen. This could be where we end up with this prospect, and it might not work. He might not end up being the quarterback of the future for the Seahawks, but he could still give us something. What does that look like?
I think your floor is pretty close to what I think. I think Cordell Stewart is kind of my floor with him, and in the sense of I think he can be a backup in the league if he doesn't hit, and we're not talking him as a starter in a franchise. I think he can be a guy that you'll be able to hand it over to a game or two as a backup because of those athletic things that will make it hard for a defense to plan. That's the floor for me, is he's going to be a backup. He can be a gadget guy that you can use in certain situations, but you're going to be looking for someone that's more consistent as your starter if he doesn't hit and doesn't develop the way you're hoping.
Okay. So let's go all the way to the other extreme. What if he's so successful at what they do with him this year that you just can't keep him off the field? He demands snaps. He demands to play. How does that work? How does that look to you? It's obviously going to be a fairly sizable distraction. It's already going to be kind of a spectacle, if you will, in preseason and so forth. How does the team handle that? How does Mike Macdonald handle that? How does Sam Darnold handle that? But also, what if you can't keep him off the field?
I think the way that you would see a situation where Jalen Milroe truly, and I mean truly, takes over at some point this year and is the guys, like you said, it would have to be, we're talking New York Jets, Sam Darnold is on the field, one. And the other fact would be that Jalen Milroe has gotten over a lot of the progression stuff that's been, and that's kind of the troubling factor for him, where it's the fact he's had multiple offensive coordinators in his college career. So when you look at a quarterback and they learn a system, you're learning reads, you're learning where guys are supposed to be, where the option route breaks at, what certain coverages dictates certain changes to the backside of the concept. And when you're going through offensive coordinator after offensive coordinator, it makes it very challenging because you're trying to remember things this year, but you also got stuff programmed in you from the year before. So for me, it would be like Milroe picks up Kubiak's offense and understands it as well as Sam Darnold, if not better, and can play freely. You're not taking and putting the training wheels on the offense so he can be successful. He has to be able to run the entirety of it flawlessly, as well as Sam Darnold. And
you certainly don't want to ruin him.
No.
Which can often happen with a rookie inserted too soon.
Exactly.
Even if he's like everything that you can imagine, Russell Wilson was a very special situation. That doesn't happen all the time.
No. And that's where, with the other thing I think that kind of allows, you talked about the team and how does it become a potential distraction. The one thing you've got here in this QB room, I think that's different than we've had, even when we had Russ towards the later part of his career in Seattle, is none of these guys really are kind of about themselves. They're about the team. Sam Darnold isn't going to be out there boasting about, how well he played or taking a bunch of media stuff and doing all that. Like, he's not going to be in the media. Like, we had Gino, and people always talk about, well, Gino was on Twitter and Gino was interacting with fans. Like, okay, that's fine. I get that. And some people it bothered and some it didn't. But you don't really see that from Sam. Like, he's just kind of head down. I'm going to work. Showed up to his press conference in flannel and jeans and whatnot. And Jalen Milroe, from everything that's come out, is he's the same way. Like, anyone that's ever kind of pressed him in a press conference that he's had about, well, when do you expect to play and stuff, he's like, hey, I'm just following the team's plan. I'm all about the team. That's all he's about. And that goes back, I think, in a lot of ways to the coaching he got from Nick Saban, which nobody was above the team in Nick Saban's Alabama. It was always about the team. And when you have a military family with two parents that were in the military, and the military is all about team, nobody's above the common goal. And that's what's instilled in your quarterback room, even from your rookie, that has all this athletic ability and everyone's expecting somewhat greatness from, that makes it a lot easier for a team as a whole to deal with it, because they can look at it and go, we're not going to get distractions from there. And that's the thing I was going to say as a whole with this team. I think that is one of the few things I've seen about a Seahawks team in a long time. I don't see any big sort of personalities as we've seen in the past. Like, we're talking about a Devin Witherspoon being a personality of JSN. There's one thing both of them have in common. They are extremely hard workers. Not saying that other guys weren't in the past, but you're not going to get the loudmouthness, I don't think, in the media that you got out of the Richard Shermans in the world. Witherspoon has never done that in the media, ever. You don't see JSN and, some of the stuff that we've seen before in the past. And so I don't think they would have a distraction issue. But when you talk about that other spectrum, those are the things for me with Jalen Milroe. He would have to know the offense as well as Sam Darnold. And I think Sam Darnold would have to be New York Jets Sam Darnold for that change to happen. And we're not even talking about Drew Lock, who apparently had quite the mini camp in his own right.
Yeah, no question. So I did want to talk about Sam Darnold a little bit in this and ask you, and then kind of lead into when Jalen may make appearances in games. So talk to me a little bit about Sam Darnold's skill set, what everyone's going to notice, what he's really good at, what he can be really good at and excel in Clint Kubiak's offense. And then where would he transition off the field and Jalen come on? Like, how would that work to you? What kind of packages could we see from Jalen Milroe? What kind of plays are we talking about here? What can people look forward to seeing?
I think with Sam Darnold, the thing that really works well is Sam Darnold is a rhythm thrower. So what I mean by that is he is really good when he can get back, understand what he's looking at, and get the ball out on time. Like, it's a 1, 2, 3 ball out. I know my read, it's either 1 or 2, and I'm getting the ball out. Sam will struggle a little bit, and you saw that in the last 2 games of the year where everyone wanted to kind of blame Sam Darnold for those losses, and it was really interesting because I don't think Sam was totally to blame in those games. I think a lot of that was, especially the Rams game, they did an amazing job in their coverage of taking away options. The longer you get Sam to hang on to the ball, the more issues Sam is going to have, and you're going to see some of that panic. And so and that's something he's actually gotten better at. So I shouldn't say it in a sense of it's a totally negative thing, but that's where you see Sam struggle, I should say, to rephrase that, is when he has to hold on to the ball an extra couple of counts because his rhythm's off. And then he's got to get back into rhythm. But the thing with Kubiak in this offense, and what Kevin O'Connell did so well with him last year, was the mix of drop back to play action, and then even drop back to quick game drop back, where it's like 1, 2, 3 balls out and the routes are under 10 yards and we're getting them out. That really helps Sam, because you didn't see a lot of what we saw with Geno last year, where you have all these deep vertical routes and we're going, okay, where's the check down for Geno just to get rid of the ball? You won't see that in Kubiak's offense. That's not what the West Coast offense is. If you go back and watch stuff about Bill Walsh talking about it, when he would talk to Montana, he would say, hey, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Your foot is in the ground and that ball is out. And if you do it that way, this route will pop open versus this coverage, and this is where the ball will land. It was that technical. And so that is where I think Sam can really excel in this offense, is Kubiak allowing for those things to be there. Hey, if we get quarters look on the outside in cover 4, and we've got this dagger concept called, the window for that deep dig is going to be right about here. And if you get to your 5th step and hitch, that's where it should be when they're in this look. You'll see Sam be successful. And that's something he's gotten better at through his career. He didn't have that with the Jets, but once he kind of got to San Francisco and then with Minnesota last year, you started to see that progress in his game. Now, to your question about when you see Milroe come into the game, I think you'll see Milroe come into the game not necessarily if Seattle's having a lot of offensive success. I think there's a chance you'll see Milroe come into games if they need a spark potentially. They need something to kind of get the momentum back. Maybe, they're down by, a touchdown or something like that. They may send him out to run a couple of plays to jumpstart a drive. Maybe it's kind of having some issues initially. They've had a couple of stall outs. You'll see him come in and do that kind of a thing. And I think in the red zone, I think if they're anywhere between the 10 and in, there's a chance, if they have a matchup they like that week based on a certain look of a defense, that's where you could see Milroe coming in. They'd be like, hey, look, if we get here we're in this area, Milroe, you're going in, and we're going into our Milroe heavy package for say.
Interesting. So on the Clint Kubiak coordinator stuff, is it semi, and I'm going back a little bit to like when Brian Schottenheimer was the coordinator. Is it that same sort of timing offense that we're going to see?
So Brian Schottenheimer's offense was more based off of the Don Coryell offense, which was play action and deep shots. That was their kind of bread and butter with that offense, where you run the ball hard, then you take that deep drop off of play action, and you're hitting like 15-yard in breakers or out breakers and posts and stuff like that. That's why DK was so successful in that offense that year, was because it really played to his skill set and his route tree. The thing with the Kubiak offense is it's more about what we call mesh and over-unders. So it's one thing that, McVay has killed us with for years. So is Kyle. You are running the ball to this outside zone scheme. And then what you have is you have it maybe an offset tight end or a tight split slot. And you start running outside zone left. Your QB pulls it, boots back around. You're running that backside X on a high post or over route behind the safety. And then you run that slot receiver that's out there back underneath the offensive line into the flat on the opposite side. And you run your wide out on the right, your Z on like a dig sit. You've created like a triangle read on the field for the quarterback, depending on what the safety does. This is your throw. And if the backer jumps the flat that you've now shot across, you throw the dig in behind him. And the backer backs up to the dig, you throw the little flat. You've created so much off of one play design by creating levels and of attack of a high-low on three different defenders. That's where you can see how this Kubiak scheme is different than what you saw with Brian Schottenheimer. Even when Shane Waldron tried to bring it from the Rams, he didn't have a lot of those concepts built into it. It was, again, deep shots, and part of that was Pete. Pete liked that in his offense, that explosive play. Kubiak scheme and Shanahan's scheme is very much more methodical. It's like almost death by 1,000 cuts. That's how they want to kind of play, and everything's based on the timing and the sit and the option route at 7 yards. You've seen Cooper Kupp kill us for years, where he turns around at 7 yards, catches the ball, and breaks a tackle, and he's gone for 12. That's what they kind of live on in this scheme.
So let's get it back to Jalen Milroe for a minute here before we finish out. So let's say that things progress, and things have. I mean, since he was drafted, he came into mini camps. From all reports, he's picked things up very well. He looked very well. He's regarded already for kind of that leadership presence. If you can have a crystal ball and look into the future, all of that intangible stuff looks to come along really well. Talk to me a little bit about what he needed to work on as a prospect. You mentioned wanting to have him go back to school. What were those deficiencies? We've already talked about the idea that he's completed 65% of his passes. If you take out some of the duds and other things, it's closer to 70%. That's pretty good efficiency. When you take a look at the touchdown to interception ratio going back to 23, that was wildly successful. And we would accept that. Last year, it was a little bit more lopsided, room for improvement there. But what fundamentally is he hung up on and can improve upon? And then if you can forecast how this kind of season progresses for him, how he develops, and what do you think 2026 looks like for him as far as being ready to compete for a starting spot potentially?
So the biggest thing for his accuracy that was a big struggle point, and a lot of people have noted it, I'm sure everyone's heard it, he was very toesy and heel clicky in the pocket. And so what I mean by that as a quarterback coach is it means your base is very narrow, and then you're also not getting your foot fully in the ground when you go to throw. So usually when your quarterback drops back, his feet should be about shoulder width to armpit width apart, and they should never get any more narrow than that. Even when he climbs and moves, they need to stay in that kind of area, because it allows you to then, when you go to transfer your weight and rotate, to get your full back foot in the ground and turn on that to create that torque in your throw. And so that was something that was really affecting his accuracy and ball placement. And that was something when he first came into rookie minicamp was still there. And I could still see it in his footwork. Then when I saw a lot of the videos that were coming out of him at real minicamp or veteran minicamp, whatever you want to call it now, you could see his base was much wider. And he was really able to turn his hips and get that rotation into his throw. And the thing I heard from Greg Bell was his accuracy improved dramatically. Like he was hitting throws in the middle and short. You didn't see a lot of one hoppers or airmailing the ball anymore. And that's a real testament to his development, his work ethic, just in that small time period with his QB coach, Jordan Palmer, who's probably the best in the business right now, and Andrew Janoko, who's even the quarterback coach for the Seattle Seahawks and developed quarterbacks for 12 years at the NFL level. That's something that they're really enforcing is his lower body mechanics. So that's where I think his biggest thing is going to come into play. And I think the VR tech that they're using that Jaden Daniels used last year, it'll also help him sync up his feet. Because the one thing with quarterbacks and where you'll see them miss a lot, especially in college, is this RPO system that everyone wants to run, the run pass option. Their feet won't move. They'll try and just throw with their upper body. And the only quarterback I've seen successfully do it a lot is Patrick Mahomes. He's kind of an anomaly. What you want to do is tie your eyes to your feet. So when you move your eyes, your feet should immediately be following. You shouldn't have your eyes get somewhere and your feet still be somewhere pointing in the other direction. That's going to affect and make his accuracy that much better. So those are the areas I think for Jalen Milroe that as they progress, and I don't think it's going to be all of a sudden he's got it figured out come training camp, but those are the things to watch for in the preseason. If he's missing a pass and they show the replay, watch where his feet are in relation to where he's actually trying to throw the ball. And you'll see that if they're off, you probably are seeing the reason for that incompletion.
Interesting. So a lot of folks passed on him in the draft. Taking a look at the kind of prospect he was and the upside, why did so many people pass on him? Number one. Number two, are the things that you've talked about as far as the fundamentals, the base, the footwork, the timing, etc., seemingly seem to be able to fix those? But I've also heard sometimes a lot of quarterbacks can be so into what they've already got established that they're just unfixable. So what is it with Jalen Milroe that gives you the confidence that he's going to be able to overcome some of these things?
So Jalen Milroe's, usually when you see stuff that they're so set in their ways with things, it's usually more to do with their actual throwing mechanic of their upper body. So a great example of that is Tim Tebow. Tim Tebow tried for years to get rid of that windmill delivery that was probably the worst throwing motion I've seen in a lot of ways outside of Phillip Rivers, who is another guy that had an awkward delivery of the football. Those are really hard to change. Your throwing motion is much like your signature when you write on a check. It's very unique to you and it only works for you. And it's very hard to change. Like if you ever try to change your hand signature on a check, it takes a lot of practice over and over and over again to do it. And still you might have issues with it. Footwork's a little bit different in that regard. And the reason I say that is your footwork doesn't really have a signature for, say, as a quarterback. It's a lot easier to change through repetition. And that's something you've already seen with Jalen Milroe in just this short time period. It's correctable. And another guy to really talk about that is Josh Allen. Josh Allen had the same issues. He heel clicked. He was very much on his toes those first couple of years at Buffalo. He then began starting to work with Jordan Palmer and realized that his base was causing him his issues. And once he started to settle down and get his base, you've seen the skyrocketing effect for Josh Allen. And a lot of it's work ethic. How dedicated are you to changing it? And I think that's where you see the difference with, if we're talking maybe about a Shedeur Sanders here and he's got something to change, might be a little bit more of a challenge for that individual. Then we're talking about Jalen Milroe, who's already proven that he wants to come in and work and get better. And I think to your other question, Bill, with why he fell in the draft is I don't think anybody that was taking a quarterback was going to be willing to wait to develop a quarterback. And that's the key thing. You look at the Giants who took Jackson Dart. They wanted a guy that they could plug in potentially in their mind and play right away. And then you look at, some of the other guys that fell, like Tyler Shuck went, again, a guy that was very much, I put him as he has to play early due to his age. You can't sit and develop him for 3 years because he'll be almost 30 by the time he sees the field. So then when you start talking and you look at some of the guys that even went after Milroe, a Will Howard, a Kyle McCord, and some of these other guys, they went to situations where they can be developed. You're not going to necessarily start right away. Jalen Milroe was, I think, in my opinion, a first-round talent in this draft, but was suited to be a developmental quarterback because he's not a first-round starter like you saw with Michael Penix's draft class. He was a first-round talent that you got in the third round because teams weren't willing to do the development. They wanted an instant starter. He's not ready to be that yet.
Are you confident in the coaching staff that we've surrounded him with?
Yes. The reason I'm confident is we're talking about a coaching staff that throughout has had success developing quarterbacks. You look at Kirk Cousins in Minnesota, Derek Carr, even down for his short little time period with Kubiak, looked really good in those before all the injuries and himself got injured. He looked kind of rejuvenated down there. Kubiak, even with what he did with Brock Purdy in the year they went to the Super Bowl, he did a great job at helping develop Brock's skill set down there in San Francisco. And we're talking about an offensive staff, and with Clint at the head of it, that has, like, if you add it all up, I'm sure over 50 years of NFL experience. And Clint's got this really great thing on his phone, probably, that's speed dial, which is, hey, Dad, you've helped develop some of the best quarterbacks in NFL history, and Steve Young, John Elway, and so on. Am I missing something? How do I help this kid along? And I'm pretty sure Gary Kubiak's going to have no problem giving his son some advice on, hey, have you tried this? This really worked well for me. So I think that leads to the success factor.
I love that. So we've been talking with Bryce Coutts, the co-host of the Hawks Zone Rundown podcast. Fantastic, really, to have you on. Very insightful. I'm sure that everyone that was listening gained a lot of knowledge and information from all the things that you kind of dived into, which was fantastic. I really appreciate your time coming on the show. I really, I was looking forward to that Jalen Milroe conversation since I knew we were going to do it, because it's one of those things that, yeah, we've all kind of talked about it, but the closer we get to training camp, and now we're into July, I really kind of just wanted to revisit him a little bit, especially with you, with your knowledge base and so forth. Again, if you can remind everyone where they can find you. And I know also that you guys are writing a little bit for Field Goals now and again, kind of tying that back into the podcast. Why don't you share a little bit about what you're up to?
Yeah. So, like you said, we're affiliated with Field Goals now. So myself and Ryan, we do the show. We do a bit of writing for them based off of what we talk about on the show. So you can find our work over there. And there's a whole bunch of other great journalists and stuff at Field Goals. Read their stuff as well. John Gilbert's over there, does a great job on that end, as well as Mookie Alexander. And then on this end for us with the show, you can find us on YouTube, the Hawks Zone Rundown. We also have a merchandise store, the hawkszonerundown.com. If you're ever interested in buying some merch, it's there as well. And you can find me on Twitter at Bryce Coutts _HZR. So feel free to message me anytime and ask any football related questions.
I do know that we've been meaning to have you on, and Ryan as well, for a long time, and we just haven't done a lot of guests in the last couple of years because both Keith and I have been so busy, but we look forward to trying to improve upon that and have you on again, as well as Ryan, for sure. Thank you so much again. You can find the Seahawks Playbook podcast on your favorite podcast platform, on our YouTube channel. Once you find that, you can hit that subscribe button, leave us a comment. Love those. And we'll be, I think our next show that we're going to do is back with Keith Myers, and we are going to do our 9th annual question and answer and beer tasting show. That's going to come after the 4th of July, sometime during that next week. And it's always a fun show. We kind of get off of football and we just talk about almost every topic that's available. And it's kind of a fun, insightful show to get to know us a little better, and gives us a break from all the football stuff, and allows us to just have some fun on the show. And that's it. So thanks again, Bryce, and we'll see everyone later. And thanks for joining us, and go Hawks.
Go Hawks.